Well, for the second time, Aer Lingus pilots have voted in favour of industrial action. The ballot, which was retaken for technical reasons, indicated 99% support out of a turnout of 89%. The Irish Airline Pilots Association, IALPA, has said that pilots are now more determined than ever to attain what they say is a 24% pay increase. Speaking earlier today, IALPA President Captain Mark Tighe addressed the likelihood of an all-out strike.
I don't believe it's inevitable. I believe the company have an opportunity to address the fairness of our claim. It is a claim for inflation that most people, not everybody, but a claim that most people have gotten over the last 5 years.
Well, joining my panel to discuss this further are Fine Gael Minister of State Neil Richmond, People Before Profit Solidarity TD Mick Barry, columnist with the Irish Independent Shane Ryan, travel expert Eoghan Corry, and former Aer Arann owner Padraig O'Cagey. You're all very welcome to the programme. Sinead, I want to actually come to you first because we heard there from Mark Tighe, the IALPA president, and he said we don't want holidaymakers to be impacted by strike action. But the threat of strike action is impacting them already, isn't it?
Well, of course it is, because, you know, there's a cost of living crisis. Everything is hard to come by and more expensive these days. People and families have saved up probably for months since last year for their summer holiday this year. School's about to be out and they want to make sure that they can get to their campsite in France or their apartment in Benidorm or their Airbnb in Italy. And the threat of this action, they might have booked Aer Lingus because they thought it's the Irish national flag carrier. We'll make sure we can get our 10 kg stored away. It's safe, we're going to get there, we know where the airport destination is. It's absolutely appalling that they are now faced at the peak time of the year with this complete uncertainty. And I mean, Ciara, people don't often book through travel agents anymore. They should, but instead they're booking Airbnbs here, they're booking through booking.com there, they're making their own arrangements on the ground, and they are now terrified if their flight is cancelled, they're going to lose a whole ton of additional money. I mean, Aer Lingus might reroute them somewhere else at a different time. That's not going to help them if they only have 2 weeks off work and it has to be these 2 weeks.
And as you were saying, I think a little earlier, look, it's not the sort of Dublin to New York flight that they will target. It's not the regular Dublin to London flight. It is that flight, Dublin to the south of France or Dublin to Madrid or Dublin to Malaga, or all those flights that people are taking for their holidays. That's what's being
Indeed. And I mean, look, the ones they want to keep, the money makers, the ones they want to keep online are the business flights, you know, the people, the flights that they know will be there after all this is done with. Aer Lingus is part of the IAG. It's like a one world consortium. There are other airlines, including BA, by the way, in that. So I think if, at the very, very least, Aer Lingus has to come out and not wait on ballots and votes and all that and say, look, this is precisely and exactly what we're going to do to reassure our customers, our family holidaymakers. If this goes ahead at any stage, here is what we're going to do. And let families have that reassurance that their flight will go ahead. And if not, that they are going to buy seats on their other airlines that they deal with to make sure that families are looked after.
Eoghan, we're hearing about this dispute now, but it has been going on for some time. How long?
Realistically, it's been going since December when the IALPA rejected the internal talks within. They then went through the WRC really quickly, the Labour Court. Remember, there was arbitration already. This is not talks that are going to arbitration. The arbitration was rejected. The reason the speed of all of that was that IALPA wanted to get into the position that they are today. They have the cards to play. When they go into talks, we have the mandate for a strike. No point striking in winter. They really needed to get this going. So it's going to be a hot June, hot July, lots of very, very hard talks. I don't expect a strike. I do expect there to be a deal, but it's going to be later rather than sooner, because every week that IALPA play this out, they can put Aer Lingus under more pressure. Aer Lingus has already been affected by the forward bookings. They're going to Ryanair and the American Airlines. They're going to be in a position where they probably have to cancel flights and reroute passengers. They are also...
So damage is being done to Aer Lingus?
And if it isn't a 2-week strike notice, they will also end up paying out compensation under EU 261. So IALPA have Aer Lingus backed into a corner. They're going to make them suffer. They're going to push them and push them and push them. And really feel there won't be a strike, but the deal would probably be signed at 4 o'clock in the morning of the day the strike was supposed to go ahead. And we'd be back in this situation where an airline has been put under pressure by its strongest union. IALPA is doing this because they have the power to do it. We've seen the Lufthansa pilots do it, the SAS Scandinavian pilots do it, and they're watching their colleagues across Europe. And they are going to get probably not the whole 23%, but very close to it, because they can just push IAG that far.
And when you say it'll come to the night before a strike, that's how close we're going to come.
That's the precedent.
That's the precedent. When would you think that strike was going to be? Like, will they call for a date, the height of July, height of August?
In fact, when they don't have a date, they affect all the forward bookings. If they start putting dates in the system, they affect the 3 days or the 4 days. But that's what's most frustrating about this is that we have checks and balances in the Irish industrial system since the 80s and the 90s. You know, that you look at old reeling in the years, you see strikes every day. We've got out of that era, and here we have a union going back into that, crashing through the safety nets.
You mean the Workplace Relations Commissions,
Labour
the Labour
Courts, the National Implementation Board used to be there as well. There were lots of different things set up, because the problem with trade unionism is, if you're a trade union, you have one weapon to play your strike, whereas management have all these other options. And to get over that hurdle, we have put all these checks and balances in place. IALPA has just bulldozed their way through them.
But you support the pilots, don't you, Mick Barry?
Yes, I support the pilots. I support them.
You support their claim?
I support their claim 100%. So let's have a quick look at that. Pilots have not had a pay increase since 2019, 5 years ago.
Now, do you believe Aer Lingus dispute that particular fact?
They can dispute it all they like. I think the facts show that there hasn't been a real pay increase for 5 years. Here's another fact. Aer Lingus made profit last year of €225 million, and the group that they're part of, the international group IAG, €3.5 billion. No pay increase for the pilots. So yes, I support them 100%. We will be supporting them on the floor of the Dáil, and if it comes to picket lines, we will support them on the picket lines as well. Of course, we hope that this issue is resolved. I think it can be resolved, but Aer Lingus need to come to their senses and pay a decent pay increase which covers the price increases that we've seen over the last 5 years.
The recommendation from the Labour Court, I think, was for just over 9%. There was a separate recommendation from another industrial tribunal that they brought in to deal with this. I think that was around 12.25%. Aer Lingus agreed to both of those. You don't think that's good enough?
How much have prices increased over the space of the last 5 years? They've increased by well over 20%. The Labour Court recommendation would have meant a de facto 10% pay cut or more for these workers. And there's a point here that I'd like to make briefly. I hope that the pilots win their claim, or the bulk of their claim, and I hope that if they do it, they set an example to other groups of workers and trade unionists in the country to say, our pay has been effectively cut, our pay effectively has not kept up with the price increases. We should follow that example and join unions and use that power to get decent pay increases for workers.
I'm just looking, I suppose, for people who might be wondering what the scale of the pay increase here. They could be looking at about €49,000 extra a year of an increase. That is above the wage that 3,500 out of the 5,000 workers in that airline will get. But do you think, yes, that's still okay?
Well,
I think that would surprise people, Mick Barry.
Okay, I think some of the figures that have been quoted have been selective. So let me select a figure. The starting rate for a pilot, starting rate of 60,000, an increase of 23% on that is very, very far from the figure that you quoted there. And it's important.
But those figures are also accurate. I think there's about 200 pilots, they're saying, within Aer Lingus. Their pay under this claim that they have would go from 287,000 to 349,000 euro a year. Most people would think even 287,000 is a pretty decent wage.
I think you're mentioning some of the captains there, but the starting rate of pay in Aer Lingus is around the 60,000 mark, and it can increase to double that after a period of 22 years. 22 years doing a really difficult, highly skilled and responsible job. And again, I make the point, this isn't just about the pilots. If the pilots win on this issue, they set a headline for other group of workers to say, we want pay increases that at least cover what we've lost in the last number of years with the price rises and inflation.
OK, let me go to Pádraig Ó Céide, who is standing by. The pilots, it would appear, are holding all the cards here. And as Mick Barry was saying, they're right to push. And they would argue we took big cuts during COVID, and now we're looking for pay increases reflective of the cost of living increases and reflective of the fact that we haven't had a pay increase since 2019. It's now 2024.
Yeah, Ciara, I don't agree with Mick, quite frankly. I believe in pay increases for lower paid, but I certainly do not agree with pay increases for people who are on 350k a year or anything like that, 200 plus pilots. For example, the Taoiseach salary is about 230 grand a year. So I really reject that. I believe IALPA are using the public as kind of hostage, put them over a barrel, caught in the middle of all of this. I also believe that's a point that was mentioned earlier by one of your panelists, that the Labour Court granted through the Labour Code system and process an increase of 9.25%. Another body, the Pilots Pay Tribunal, as you mentioned, Ciara, recommended a pay increase of just over 12%, 12.25 or so percent. Why not follow those directions? I can't understand why they won't follow them. They'll follow them when it suits them, and then they don't follow them when it doesn't suit them. I actually really believe, unfortunately, IALPA and some of their leaders have put themselves into a corner and taken a soccer term out of it. They've lost the dressing room. They've lost the support of the public. So they have. And I'm disappointed because IALPA have traditionally played a very important role in relation to Irish aviation and so on. And quite frankly, in my view, more often than not in the past, they've been quite reasonable and fair. But unfortunately, this time, as I say, they've lost the dressing room.
Yeah, but watching the point that Mick Barry made there, that is on the 200 top earning captains within Aer Lingus, but there's other people who'll be starting in that industry, or maybe I think he said 60,000. A 24% increase wouldn't bring their wages, anywhere near those big high headline figures that everybody was talking about. That's quite a reasonable increase for what is a highly pressurised, highly skilled job.
Yeah, in my view, that salary of starting is more or less similar to what it is in relation to other airlines, based on my experience. But in any event, if you're going into Aer Lingus, first of all, there's a huge queue of people who want to be pilots. Secondly, it costs a couple of $100,000 that the airline pays for to train a pilot, much, much more so than it does cost in the vast majority of other professions that are out there. Thirdly, pilots, and rightly so, they fly in the region of maximum 800 to 900 hours a year. That's their flying time. So it is, and that's right, that should be there for safety reasons and so on. But there's a fair amount of flexibility in relation to all of that. So because of those 3 points, I'd agree with pilots who are entering at 60 grand a year getting a pay increase, absolutely, but not at the other end of the scale.
Okay, let me just go to Neil Richmond, who's also here in studio. First of all, is IALPA using the public as a hostage?
I think they're using a very clear industrial tactic of which, like Eoghan has said, we haven't seen in a long time in Ireland, and that's a good thing. I'm a proud trade unionist, like Mick, although at different unions, and I was the Minister for Employment Affairs up until very recently. We have had a period, a very difficult economic period, but we haven't had the levels of unrest, say, like we've seen in the UK or across the continental EU, because we have robust systems. And the main thing we'd like to see is both IALPA and Aer Lingus get back to the Labour Court as quickly as possible, because we all agree, I think, and I hope, that they deserve a pay rise. No one's mentioned that in the last 5 years, the aviation industry was decimated by the COVID-19 pandemic. All airlines were impacted by that. I remember the last meeting I had with IALPA was actually in relation to getting them back up in the air and getting them back to work. But I think what everyone wants to see is people getting this resolved as quickly as possible, not leaving it to 4 a.m.
I think Michael O'Leary called us today industrial blackmail. That's what's going on here. They've chosen a very particular time where they know that the even threat of a strike is doing huge damage to Aer Lingus, and the pressure from customers will push Aer Lingus back against a wall.
No, it's a very deliberate industrial tactic that's open to any trade union, different seasons, different times of year, impact different unions in different sectors.
Is it the wrong tactic?
It's a tactic that's up to them. Obviously, when you have people sitting at home worrying about their family holiday or possibly travelling this summer, I think that's adding a lot of stress that's unnecessary. What we want to see from government is a couple of things. We want to see people back around the table as soon as possible. Aer Lingus don't need to digest the result of this ballot. They don't need to question whether it was in person or indeed it was online. Get back to the table as soon as possible. The state is open. the resources that are open, but also we need to see that clarity from Aer Lingus that they'll meet all the consumer responsibilities that are born on them, and we need to see that commitment. And I welcome an element of what Captain Tighe said there, that IALPA don't envisage strike will happen and they see a window out of it. Let's get that done as quickly as possible.
I'd just like to make a point about the use of language, because it's interesting the language that is being used in this debate about the trade unionists in this situation. One word that has been used has been blackmail. Another word that has been used has been threatening, whereas the state are open, the Labour Court is making an offer, it's all very reasonable. The fact of the matter is that the airline group that Aer Lingus is part of made profits of €3.5 billion last year.
If we're going to the previous 3 years, Mick, you have to be balanced in that.
Yes,
I haven't used the term
but
blackmail
it was interesting as well, and I was going to remark on it, Neil, that when you talked about the difficult situation during COVID, you talked about the difficulties that faced the airlines and their profit lines.
And their staff.
Yes,
and you
exactly.
wanted to have a zero COVID policy.
Look at the wage cuts and the loss in income of the staff in the airlines, workers and trade unionists in the airlines during that period. And now we have a recovery to the point that Aer Lingus made profits of 225 million last year, and the group 3.5 billion, and they are refusing and threatening, if you want to use the language, to bring things to the brink by refusing to give a cost of living pay increase.
Okay, very briefly, there's 3 billion there, and the pilots say, we want a share of that. This isn't enough.
And they're absolutely entitled to a share of it. An offer has been made on a pay increase, and we want them to get back.
Here we have it again.
Oh, sorry.
Use of language.
But that is, like, sorry, Mick. That is just exactly the terminology that we use.
They've offered to cut their pay by 10% in real terms.
No, this is, again, playing with language. Sorry. To your question directly, we want to see both people get around the table. We do want to see the pilots going to get pay rise. But we most importantly want to see the strikes averted, and we want to see the consumers put at ease.
Would you expect employees to accept a Labour Court recommendation?
Well, we expect them to engage with the Labour Court fully, and if they don't accept the recommendation, that they get back to the Labour Court as quick as possible. That is what it's there for.
So just a recommendation, and you can decide whether you like it or not. I know it is that, but would you expect when they've gone through the WRC, when they've gone through a tribunal, they've now gone through to a Labour Court, you get a recommendation, would you expect employees to take that?
The Labour Court is there until there is a resolution. The Labour Court is completely independent of the government, as it should be. That's what it's there for. We will see a resolution, I hope, through the Labour Court very soon.
Sinead,